Okay, so we'll get started. Bonjour et rebienvenue.
Hi, and welcome back.
But there seems to be a lot of real excitement in the room based on the conversations that are going on. I'm sure everyone is eager to share findings with a larger group. So let's get started. We will invite one representative from each group to provide a 2 to 3 minute summary of their key findings and most promising solutions. Then I will talk briefly about the next steps before we go on our way. So let's begin with session number 1, distinct housing needs, and can I ask Tom Carter to kick us off, please?
Good afternoon. Our group had some wide-ranging discussions, but I was asked to focus my comment just on solutions, specifically 4 solutions that people felt would help better address the needs of distinct groups. The first solution was to develop a centralized data or research depository. There's many distinct housing needs groups, and many have been identified, and they sometimes have common characteristics, but they also have different characteristics, and it was felt that there was a lack of good data on specific groups. It was also felt that a lot of work has been done across the country by different individuals and organizations, but others are not always aware of this information. So we felt there was a need for a centralized facility or organization where this data could be collected and deposited. Therefore, it could be accessed by different groups and organizations to help them develop better housing strategies and better understand the needs of distinct groups. We felt that federal assistance with creation and operation of the necessary infrastructure will be necessary, and we also realize that there may be ownership of data issues that have to be resolved. The second solution I was asked to mention is an intermediary support system. The creation of an intermediary between landlords and tenants with special needs, a person who works to solve issues and problems, ensures rents are paid, tenants' diverse needs are met, searching out services, serves as a peer leader and a mentor for the tenants, works with the landlord and tenants to solve problems, and it's someone that both sides can go to resolve issues. This should result in a more supportive and stable housing environment and reduce the stigma often associated with special needs groups. A program like this is in operation in Moncton, and a report on its operation is available. We feel it's an approach that has an advantage for both tenants and landlords. Number 3, the group felt that there should be the development of a national framework for the delivery of the National Housing Strategy, a model to delineate roles and responsibilities and identify interventions to work toward the ultimate goal everyone has to access adequate and affordable housing, to make sure policies and interventions translate to concrete, specific initiatives in communities. The structure should enable the federal government to maintain and act on the principles of universality. It should also ensure that the provinces play an active role in policy and program development and funding. Within this framework, we had a special focus on municipalities, suggesting they have to play a more formalized role with the requirement that they develop municipal housing strategies. Currently, it's a very uneven approach by municipalities across the country. Municipalities would have to have access to supports and initiatives to establish delivery strategies, because we feel that addressing needs is best done at the local level, results in a better match between needs and solutions. It may require regulatory changes to planning, zoning guidelines, and approaches. It's really about setting up a structure by which the 3 levels of government can work collaboratively and enhance the work of nonprofit and community groups in addressing distinct needs. 4, and final, Streamlining the financial processes. It was suggested that the federal government mandate or require all provinces to set up a body based on the BC housing model where all funds, capital and loans, flow through one body for the creation of housing, generally by nonprofit and community groups. This would help streamline the process, and the advantage is that if the group defaults, goes broke, discontinues its operations, the asset goes back to the body as opposed to the bank. This reduces risks and creates more affordable stock. It also facilitates or helps groups use existing stock to leverage funds for other projects, and it ensures better coordination of funding that meets the needs. We realize that some of our solutions probably go beyond the distinct housing needs group, and we acknowledge that we probably went a little further than we should have in some cases. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. The next session was Shelters for Victims of Family Violence. Can I ask Lisa Rupert to please debrief us?
Okay, so the first thing we talked about was the design of transition houses and shelters. That currently the communal living model, for example, creates some barriers for people. So sometimes transition houses won't accommodate people with substance use issues, mental health issues, with teenage sons, with pets, with extended family members because of the communal living situation. And a lot of that could be addressed by restructuring the existing ones from communal living to having independent units, even if it was just private bathrooms and small kitchenettes in each room, with some communal space as well. In addition, meeting the needs of people with disabilities, having, for example, a pool of tools for people who experience disabilities that transition houses could borrow. For example, if someone was deaf, that the transition house could then borrow the lighting equipment that they need for safety in case of fire. So that typically we have maybe one unit that's accessible, that it would increase our ability to take people with different needs. And that in any new transition houses and shelters, we incorporate those sorts of ideas. The second idea was around a system navigator, so creating a separate stream of funding for integrated case management for people who've experienced violence in an intimate relationship, which may include their children and possibly even the offender. It would be based on a safety-first model, taking into account cultural, emotional, and physical safety, and that there would be, with client consent, information sharing between various systems such as justice and health. That there would be a navigator who people could access that would introduce a menu of options for them with the end goal of securing permanent sustainable housing, including a website for those who can't access the navigator or who choose not to access them. We also discussed the usefulness of portable housing supplements and other sort of more scattered options rather than having just purpose-built social housing. To take advantage of commercial models and to have flexibility to invest capital locally. Within that, we talked about having reporting back on that so that we can track the effectiveness. We also addressed housing barriers to women without legal status or with precarious legal status, so women who've been abused by an intimate partner who failed to sponsor them or canceled their sponsorship. And this could be addressed by the federal government by repealing conditional sponsorship and by fast-tracking humanitarian and compassionate applications for permanent resident status for women who've experienced violence, similar to what the United States does under VAWA 2. And the YWCA Metro Vancouver also has a plan in place for that, suggestions. And the final one, which is kind of the big ask, is to build more affordable social housing in Canada with targeted increases per year. And then the last thing that was said was we already know the best practices, that we'd like to focus on putting what we know to practical use right now.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I noticed you had even more notes, so thank you for keeping it to the main ones. The next one, the session 3, was social housing sustainability, and Greg Dooling will be the presenter.
Good afternoon. It's a privilege to be here. Today we discuss the sustainability of social housing. We address the current stock and how we could grow sustainably to better meet the needs of low-income Canadians. Through vigorous debate and a few skirmishes, we did agree upon some solutions, certainly not to imply that it is exhaustive, rather it was limited by time and the scope afforded us for today's exercises. The themes that guided our conversation today included the quality of the current social housing stock, the capacity of the sector to deliver, funding certainty from all orders of government, social and environmental implications, the roles and responsibilities of all stakers involved, and the evidence-based decision-making through the use of data. In the afternoon, we focused on some solutions, and we're suggesting 4 for your consideration today. The first one is place-based decision-making that brings all parties together at a local level. This creates buy-in and engagement from communities that are best served by the citizens that comprise those communities. In other words, a national housing strategy with local implementation. The second solution we suggest is a housing bank and a foundation combined. That would provide low-cost financing and investment for the sector. This would reduce development and redevelopment costs. This is not new for CMHC. We're asking them to get back into the game, and this could also include opportunities for social investment from others to participate. The third, a sustainable RGI system, or rent geared to income system, that is supported through an interest-bearing investment fund. Revenue from these investments would support the ongoing subsidization of rental rates. The government would be the primary investor of this fund to start it, and it could be supplemented by other social investors as well. And finally, a sustainable mixed income model that socially and financially integrates communities. Through a portfolio approach, low-income rent is cross-subsidized by market rent. This model is foundational to a strategic asset plan and continuing new development as it grows. At the end of the day, all of us want to go home. We hope that a national housing strategy will enable all Canadians to live in a home that they can afford. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg. Next up is new rental supply, and it will be John Dickey.
Thank you. I was asked to address first how the group sees the desired outcomes of the National Housing Strategy. Those goals are the following. Homelessness is rare, brief, and one time. There is a sufficient supply of housing in Canada, both rental and ownership, at all price points, in good repair, where needed, and in integrated, livable communities. 3, all low-income people receive adequate assistance to meet their housing needs. In the processes for the NHS, for the implementation of the NHS, the group thinks these are the desirable midpoints, that government roles are clear at all 3 levels, that governments and all the housing sectors are working together well, that the housing system includes a diversity of supply sources to achieve resiliency and flexibility. In terms of the most promising solutions to the question of getting new rental housing supply, we came to 4 solutions, one of which has 3 bullet points. 1, the use of the federal borrowing capacity to provide reduced cost financing or construction financing to obtain more new market and below market rental units. 2, tax policy reforms to make rental developments more attractive. such as A, zero HST on new rental construction at all rent levels. B, tax deferral on the sale of a building as long as it takes place within a year of the purchase of a newly built rental building. C, active business tax treatment for new rental buildings. Then our third area, we believe there needs to be program flexibility within the National Housing Strategy to recognize different situations between provinces or territories and among regions and municipalities within the provinces and territories. To do that, we believe the federal government should tie federal money to objectives rather than to criteria. And the federal government should include the municipalities in the discussions. As our fourth key solution, we suggest the reduction of regulatory burden and NIMBYism. Specifically, we suggest that the federal government should tie housing and infrastructure funding to municipal rental housing plans that streamline the approval process for new rental housing supply.
Thank you, John. Next up is Jane Launderville for Housing Finance.
Thank you. So our group came to the consensus basically in the room that the current housing finance system works well overall for homeowners. The simple, transparent government mortgage insurance program has contributed to a resilient finance system, and that's certainly been obvious in comparison to other countries during the global financial crisis. Any changes that we make to this system should be thoughtful and gradual. That was emphasized by the bankers in the room. And that allows the market participants to adapt to these new changes as things happen. And they also should be aligned to stated objectives. But they could be a useful tool to deal with being counter-cyclical during downturns in the economy. Sudden changes, though, create uncertainty and fluctuations. The government also plays a key role on the non-market side in terms of investment where needs are, and by enabling the finance sector to invest with appropriate risks being addressed for the non-market housing. The housing finance system is an important element of addressing non-market affordability. Housing finance and the National Housing Strategy presents a real opportunity to address broad financial stability objectives for the country. There needs to be regional applicability of the strategy as well. This will be important. And housing finance authorities need a publicly available playbook for various scenarios to ensure transparency of what will happen in certain situations. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Last but not least, for Indigenous housing, we have Richard Hart.
Well, good afternoon, and we're at the end of the day here, so it's been an exciting day. And just want to thank CMHC for the opportunity to meet such interesting people and have such interesting discussions. The Let's Talk Housing was a very appropriate title for this meeting. I was in the Indigenous housing group today, and I want to clarify that when we're talking about Indigenous housing, we're not talking on-reserve housing. That was a session that was done yesterday. In this session that we were talking about today, we were talking about urban, Native people, Aboriginal people, whatever you want to use, the term you want to use, that are living in urban centers or rural centers that are not living on reserve or not, or, not necessarily reserved people. So that could, be Métis, it could be status, non-status, it could be the Inuit, that type of thing. But the first thing that we said that was a new national housing strategy needed, that it must include a specific Indigenous housing strategy or focus. There has to be a focus specifically on Indigenous housing, so that it's made a priority in any sort of national housing strategy going forward. And it must include all Indigenous people in Canada, no matter where they live. So whether you live up north, whether you live in a city, or if you live in a rural municipality, it should include you. And whether you're Métis, Inuit, the different categories that are placed on people, they all have to be included. And we need to provide clarity to the realities Indigenous people face in today's society with respect to the history of anything that's happened in the past, traditionally, whether it's treaties, whether it's how do I say it, residential school things, or whether it was land that's been expropriated from them, that sort of thing. We've got to pay attention to the history of the people that we're trying to serve. We also, and when we're talking about this, the best way to address anything is to work together and to provide a collaborative approach or model that brings people together to discuss an issue. And you have to bring all stakeholders to the table, whether it's the federal government, the provincial government, municipal government, whether it's, how do I say it, apartment builders, much like what we see around the table here today, to bring people together so they can discuss this issue, or these issues, because it's a major issue. We have a lot of indigenous people that are living on the fringes of society in our urban centers, and a lot more things have to be done to make things change. And it's through processes like this that a change can come. And I've enjoyed the last 2 days because there's been so much discussion and so many solutions, potential solutions that come forward, that it reinvigorates you. And I look around, I just see the passion that the people have in this topic, in housing, that that things are going to, how do I say it, change, because I think there's a real commitment to change, and I think I can see it in the people around here. And like I said before, having all the stakeholders at the table will generate the solutions, but there needs to be a real commitment to the Indigenous community, and we must move the locus of control from non-Indigenous governments or entities and move the control back to the community that we're purporting to serve. And that's the Indigenous community, no matter where they live, and that's the key to the future. If we move that control, good things are going to happen. And with people like yourselves working together to make change is going to happen. And the table I was at, great discussion, passionate people. I love it. So I wish I was at every one of your tables. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. A special thank you for the people who volunteered to be representatives of their roundtable and for undertaking the difficult job, I'm sure, of summarizing the discussions. I'm sure there was, as Richard mentioned, there was a lot of passion, so it must have been difficult to be trying to take notes and summarize that. So let's talk about what's next. CMHC will continue to support Minister Duclos by gathering and analyzing all the information from various consultation processes, including this week's roundtables and a meeting with the national housing stakeholders to take place on September 19th to create the pillars of Canada's national housing strategy. Le ministre Duclos diffusera un rapport
Minister Duclos will be disseminating a report on what we heard on the 22nd of November on the National Housing Day. He will also, on that day, announce the next step and especially the demand for approval of the National Housing Strategy by Cabinet. I definitely don't want to steal the minister's thunder as to the date that we can expect the national strategy to be launched, so I will let him answer that question himself.
I do want to thank you again and express our appreciation for all of you for being here today and taking time out of your busy schedule to share your ideas and expertise with us. We've heard some great ideas this afternoon from each of the roundtables, which we will be sharing with Minister Duclos and the Government of Canada in the coming days. Thank you again for contributing so meaningfully to the development of Canada's National Housing Strategy. Have a great evening. Merci et bonne soirée.